Have you ever wondered where you really stand with God? Are you overcome with feelings of guilt because of things you've done wrong? Are you tired of religion that focuses on rules that you can't keep? Have we got good news for you? It's time to listen in on some casual conversation with Mike Kapler and Joel Brueseke and discover what true freedom is all about. This is Growing in Grace.
Welcome again to Growing in Grace. I'm Joel the Breeze Man, along with Mike the Kapler, the radio legend, Mike Kapler, I should say.
you were listening to Sherathon.
Cap the legend. We're going to have to start calling you that. You know, some of our listeners, you may be new to our podcast, our Growing in Grace program, and Cap and I spent some years in radio. Cap, though, a lot more years than I did. Basically, since the mid-'80s. Is that right, Cap, that you've been, you started in radio? Is that right?
That is true.
Yeah, so, in a Christian hit format on a radio station here in Waterloo, Iowa, which is where we're podcasting from, I guess I should say. And, I was listening in the other day. You're back on the radio after a 3-year absence or so, and they were having some fun with you, but Cap the legend, I think, is very fitting for all the years and all the work that you did in radio, Cap. So my hat goes off to you in
what was funny about
status.
That is the person you're talking about, that's the first time we were on the air together, and he's been in radio for quite a while. And I was looking at him when he was saying that stuff, Joel, that he knew of me out in California and all this stuff. He looked like he was really serious. He was a little bit nervous about being on the air with me, and that was strange to me. And he kept calling me the legend for the next 3 hours, and we kind of started having some fun with it. But
I thought it was fun.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear that perspective from him, because he is definitely a radio guy, that's for sure. But hey, good to be back with you again, Joel. We do this podcast every week. Feel free to share it, email it, send the link, or get it on Facebook. More and more people checking out what we've got to say, and we appreciate that, because all we're trying to do is communicate what we believe is to be the true gospel, and that is good news for all of us. How many times have you been to church and you walk out feeling worse than when you walked in? I don't think you'll have that problem after you listen to our 14-minute podcast weekly. It will bring encouragement and hopefully some freedom, maybe even some relief to your life. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, that's right. And we're not just trying to give out fluffy, fluffy words, just, feel-good words, but we really do believe that the gospel is good news. God gave the gospel and it is good news. It's meant to make a person feel good because it's meant to make a person understand God's goodwill toward them. That's what the gospel is. It's God's goodwill toward mankind, where he so loved the world that he sent his one and only son, Jesus Christ, that, even though we were dead to God, because of being born in Adam, in the world stained with sin, God so loved the world that he sent Jesus Christ, and that's good news, and we should feel good about how God feels about us. So that's what we're talking about. And, there are some things over the years, Cap, that when I did attend church services, those various church services where I left feeling worse about myself when I left than when I went in. And a lot of those sermons had to do with a subject that we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to hopefully give a good perspective on this, the subject of works and how various scriptures talk about Christians and works, and how it's kind of viewed as we look at ourselves from a perspective of God's grace. And so we got a few scriptures to share, and hopefully, again, this will be something where you'll go, oh, if this is new to you, it's not about how much work I do, but it's about God's working in and through me. So anyway, we'll spend some time on that today, Cap.
Well, where do you want to start at with this, Joel?
Well, there's a lot of good scriptures here, and there's a couple of them, Cap, we were talking about before we got on here. Let's start off with the one that I think a lot of people really that messes up a lot of people, or that just makes a lot of people turn their heads, and also gets the legalistic treatment in the church, and that is in Philippians 2, where It says Paul's talking to the church, the people of at Philippi, the Philippian church, and he says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure." Well, the first part of that has not made a lot of people feel good. The work out your salvation with fear and trembling. What does that mean, Cap? Is that saying that I am responsible for my salvation by my works? Is that what Paul's trying to say there? Or has he got something else in mind?
Well, I think he's probably got something else in mind, Joel, because we sometimes we get tunnel vision when we look at verses in the Bible, and we get so bogged down by just focusing in on a few sentences without taking a step back and seeing what has been said before that verse and after that verse. And I'm not just talking about verses here. Sometimes you might have to go back chapters to try to find the real point of what Paul is trying to say. And we've talked a lot about that here on our podcast at Growing in Grace. How many times have we pointed out scriptures that have been misinterpreted, misunderstood, because we're just looking at this one verse and not taking a look at what's around it? And you already kind of gave us the answer in the second half of that verse, Joel.
Well, see, I did, but the sad thing is that it goes unnoticed in the church. I mean, people can even read what I just read, and it totally go over their head. And so that's why we want to talk about this one in particular. Paul did say, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And, of course, we need to understand there that the fear and trembling that he's talking about is not being afraid of God, but it's an awe, it's a reverence, it's looking at God as, wow, this is the God of the universe, and he has so much love for us that he saved us. And so let's look at him with, as a friend, as a father, as someone who loves us, and with that awe and reverence, because he's God. But yeah, the second part of this, verse 13 in Philippians 2, it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. And so this working out of our salvation, that doesn't mean that it's you and me, Cap, or anyone listening. It doesn't mean that it's any Christian who's responsible to make sure that their works save themselves, so they can maintain their salvation by their own works. It's that God is in us. He's working in us. He himself is at work in us to will and to do for his good pleasure, and it's a working out of that. It's that working itself out of our lives. God in us, working himself out of us.
Well, and it's well put, Joel, and it's an important thing, because some of the things we've talked about in the past or even recently related to the fact that it's not even our life anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's the life of God in us. So I don't even dedicate my life. I don't give my life, you see, because as a believer on the cross, I died with Christ. It's no longer I who live. He lives in me and works through me. So I can't take credit even for the good things I do. I do have freedom. I can make choices, Joel, good and bad. And I know there's probably a little bit of a fine line as we try to think this through, at least in the minds of a lot of people. It seems like a fine line. But it's the works of God, the one who lives in me, working through me. So I take credit for nothing. As I recall, I'm trying to think of where it's at. Maybe I will here in just a little bit. Paul said, let me not boast of anything other than what God does through me.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of sums it up. I mean, there's a lot of people saying, well, good works should be a part of our life. Well, yeah, okay, maybe they should be if that's the way you want to phrase it. But that's because of this new nature that resides in us. There's this new nature. Joel, I'm a righteous, holy, perfected, forgiven child of God. But it's through inheritance, not through anything that I've done. It's through birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I've received an inheritance, just like what you and I will give to our kids. Why are you giving an inheritance to your children? Because they're simply your children, not because they performed up to any certain expectation that you might have had for them. And you may have some hopes and expectations for them, but that's not why you're leaving them an inheritance, because they live up to something. It's just simply because they're a part of your family. You're a family together, and that's how we've received the things, the good things and the blessings that we received from Christ is because of inheritance and new birth. It's His life in me, though. That's my point. No matter what good I do, I cannot take credit for that as I abide in Christ and just trust in Him to move through me.
That's right. It is. It is a matter of it being about inheritance, because there is absolutely no work that we ever did to save ourselves or to maintain our salvation. It can't be about that. Otherwise, it's not of grace. And in another place, Paul says it's if it's of grace, then it's not of works. Otherwise, work is no longer work. And if it's of works, then it's not of grace. Otherwise, grace is no longer grace. So we have to understand that our salvation is by grace, and the working out of our salvation, as Paul words it in Philippians, is by God's grace as well, because it's Him, it's God who is at work in us to will and to do according to His good pleasure. And so if we rest and abide in His life in us, again, like He so aptly put it, we died. We're already dead, and the life we live is no longer us, but it's Christ in us. And as we rest in that, we'll see the works of God being worked out in and through us, because it's no longer us, but it's God who's working in us. And we see Paul talking about this in other places as well. And again, that's why we want to say, let's not just rip out this one passage from Philippians and say, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, as so many do. But we really got to take into consideration all the things that Paul said about works and salvation. And I know we got just a couple minutes left here, and maybe we should save a couple of these other scriptures that we were going to talk about for next time. And I'll kind of give a little bit of a background. Paul was a person who would build up the people that he wrote to, and I would suppose he did this in his one-on-one conversations with other people too, and when he was in person, face-to-face with others, he would build them up in their identity. He was big on talking about God's grace. This is who you are by God's grace. And then if he had something to say about how it looks, what it looks when it's lived out, when it's walked out, he would always kind of sandwich it with the talks of identity and grace. And so we'll bring up at least a couple of scriptures next week where Paul's talking about that. And do you have any final words as we wrap things up here this week, Cap?
Well, let's use this phrase, Joel. Listen to this. We'll close the program here. But works say that I can get God to respond to me. Faith is my response to what God has already done in Jesus Christ.
Yes, that's the truth, and that is a really good place to end. And so we look forward to talking more about this next week, Cap, on our Growing in Grace program. And as we finish up here, don't forget, as Cap said at the beginning, please, would you spread the word about the Growing Grace program through the internet? You can find our GigCast at gigcast.graceroots.org. Email people, sign up on, put a link up on your Facebook page, your MySpace page, where your own website. We sure appreciate you spreading the word, because it's not about Cap and I, but it's about the message of God's grace that's getting out there, and we're so appreciative of everybody who's spreading the word about the message of God's wonderful grace. And we'll be back again next time on Growing in Grace.
This has been Growing in Grace with Mike Kapler and Joel Brizicki, heard weekly on Gracewalk Internet Radio and other online sources around the world. To access hundreds of past programs, visit graceroots.org. Share it with a friend and listen again next week for more Growing in Grace.